I don't necessarily think that inherently deregulation is bad.
Where was the thinking of Mileva?
I saw how seriously AI security was starting to be taken.
Today we welcome Harriet Farlow, the founder of Mileva Security Labs, an AI security company helping organizations navigate AI risk. Harriet has spent 10 years at the intersection of AI and security as a data scientist with the Department of Defense, a startup in New York, and acting technical director at the Australian Signals Directorate. With her PhD in AI security, she also contributes to AI security standards, industry best practices, and speaks at events like DEFCON. Harriet, thank you so much for coming today. And you have flown in, so jet lag aside, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling pretty good. I'm very grateful to be here. Thank you so much for having me, and mostly awake. So if anything, at least I'll be more candid.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. That's what we want. It's Ramadan for us, so it's kind of, I think between the two of us, we might have a few moments of pause.
No, it'll be an extra exciting interview, I think.
I think so. Let's talk about just your company for a start. Where was the thinking of Mileva?
Well, it's always funny hearing my bio read back to me. It's funny sitting here and hearing it. Obviously, the listeners will have heard that I worked in AI for a long time. I was a data scientist on lots of different projects, mostly on the Department of Defense, but also other large public sector projects in Australia and on banks. And in all of that time, people were starting to talk about bias and ethics and safety concerns. But no one ever talked about security of the machine learning models that we were building. And when I was working at the Australian Signals Directorate, that's when I started my PhD in something entirely different. It was about translating signals intelligence to military customers. And in the literature review process, I discovered this field called adversarial machine learning, which was all about how to hack machine learning models, basically, and all of the security implications of that. And I just thought it was crazy that in all this time as a data scientist, I'd never, ever heard this field talked about. There was never any education about it. There wasn't a lot of public awareness or media reporting. Somehow all of the academic literature hadn't really filtered through to the practitioner level. So that's how I picked up the field of adversarial machine learning and AI security. And especially working in a national security environment, I saw how seriously AI security was starting to be taken, and was lucky enough to see the response of different countries around the world to that. But I saw the big missing piece being what companies were doing about it, particularly small and medium enterprises, because, large companies like Microsoft, they can afford to invest in, AI red teams. So teams of people that go through their AI systems and machine learning models and make sure that they're secure. But that's much harder for smaller companies to do. So I started Mileva Security Labs with the intention of trying to help smaller companies understand what they could, reasonably do to secure their AI systems with, maybe smaller budgets and without having so many in-house, experts.
Experts, yeah.
Yeah.
And thinking of the name itself, what was coming up with a company name is always a tough thing, then going through the process of identifying what would work for your target audience. But what was the thinking behind that?
Well, first of all, most AI names are taken, so it's really hard to find a company name in the AI field that hasn't already been taken by the thousands of AI startups that exist at the moment. But I originally did a physics degree, and a lot of the theoretical physicists, particularly Albert Einstein, was someone that I really looked up to, because they were people who, they developed really important theories, but they were also kind of cool people. Like, they're a bit eccentric. They had really strong opinions on politics and the way that the world worked. And I remember reading his biography, and I got this tattoo, E equals MC squared, on my arm to sort of, remember some of his messages. But as we were trying to come up with a company name, I thought back to the story of his wife, Mileva. And she was also a brilliant mathematician and physicist, and one of the first women to graduate from their university, because they studied together. And there's quite a lot of speculation that she contributed to some of his early work, which is probably not true based on what it takes to be credited as an author on a paper. But I think the point was that she never would have been able to get to the point where she could be credited because she was a woman in that time and she was his wife and she was raising their child, especially because a lot of the time we work with people who don't always have a lot of resources to help support, everyone to reach their ambitions, whatever sort of background they come from.
She lives on through the name of your company. So you talk about, just staying on that thread in terms of the sector itself, have you seen a shift and a change? Because when you think about tech and when you talk about AI and security, often enough you kind of think it's going to be a certain type of person in there. Have you seen changes in the sector in terms of more opportunities and also actually being able to do what you do, which you're brilliant at, in a space where people might think, oh, it's just men doing that stuff?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I speak about this a lot with other female and male colleagues. I certainly remember when I was younger and I was working at Deloitte, there was definitely a bit of a tech bro attitude, and I didn't encounter anything outwardly sexist, but I certainly, if I walked into a room, people would come up to me and assume that I was in customer service or something, which when you're already a bit insecure about your technical skills really hits quite close to the bone, These days, when I started the company, I was really worried that I would encounter a lot of resistance or pushback or people who just assumed I was dumb or didn't know what I was talking about. And for the most part, I actually don't. And I can only think of a couple of instances where anyone has said something remotely negative, and usually it's clear that it comes from a place of competition or insecurity. I think the main thing is, there's obviously a level of unconscious bias, and sometimes I wonder if I were a man or if I looked different, would Mileva have grown faster? But that's, it's tough because there's so many intersections there. It's not just gender. There's all sorts of reasons why people are perceived differently, and so it's
Absolutely
not useful to fixate on it. But I think it's really positive the way the field is heading, especially because when I was in earlier roles, it was more management consulting roles where I was working with less technical people, I guess, and executives. And now I work with a lot of security people. And in that culture, it's really about what you can do rather than who you are. And it seems like as a community of people and professionals, it's actually a really great community of people to work with. So that could be it too.
Now, you're from Canberra, so I'm going to borrow from your AI comedy sketch in terms of where there's more car parks than people. I think that's what's in terms
I don't know if we want to highlight the comedy sketch to the listeners over all the other content.
I think it's important to know that you can be in AI and cybersecurity and have a sense of humour.
I think so too.
Which I think is really brilliant. Let's focus on what you specialise in terms of, and help myself and the audience kind of understand a little bit more in terms of adversarial machine learning. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
I sure can. It's a really fun field, but obviously quite concerning. So the field of adversarial machine learning is quite academic in origin. It's 10 or so years old, maybe. Basically, it looks at ways that you can hack machine learning models. So you can disrupt them, deceive them, or disclose information from them. And when we say hack a model, I mean, people have been trying to hack algorithms, for example, as long as they've existed. As long as any sort of information technology system has existed, people have been trying to hack them. And early examples of algorithms from 20 to 30 years ago are things like spam filters in emails, and criminals trying to evade those. The thing that changed with adversarial machine learning was the rise of these deep machine learning models, which fundamentally changed the way that models were built. And instead of having really simple algorithms where you could understand their rules and how they worked, it was, this process of taking a lot of input data, training a machine learning model that was pretty black box, you couldn't understand exactly how it worked. And finding ways to compromise, the classifications or predictions that they outputted, or find ways to leak information about those models and the training data. So, 12 years ago, this paper was published by Szegedy and Goodfellow, and they proposed this way that you could add special adversarial pixels to an image of a panda so that it was classified as a gibbon by a machine learning model, but in such a way that a human couldn't tell the difference. And this was considered really transformative, and it promoted a lot of research into this area, whereby introducing really subtle inputs to some data, you can either make the machine learning model just not function at all, so you can disrupt it, or you can deceive it in a premeditated way. So if you wanted that the model to specifically predict that image was a gibbon, or anything else like a starfish, you could imagine how those kinds of techniques expanded into the real world could be really concerning.
Well, that has profound impacts because a lot of governments are using facial recognition in city centres, in public transport.
Yeah, so 12 years ago it was concerning, but there wasn't mass AI adoption then. It was still really narrow machine learning implementations. And now we have AI in almost every enterprise tool. And especially in the UK, where you guys have cameras everywhere, and there's surveillance tools like that, and other countries using surveillance technologies too. Chatbots are in every tool. Everyone's using Microsoft Azure or Copilot, and the kinds of autonomy that these artificial intelligence agents are given is so much broader than 10 years ago. So those adversarial machine learning techniques have really evolved to those sorts of agentic autonomous systems, and there's over 100 different kinds of attacks. There are defenses too, but there's still very much a focus on AI adoption and alignment with values, but not nearly as much attention on the security of those models.
So what are you seeing right now, and what can you or Mileva can do for small, medium enterprises? Because the rapid innovation and now adoption without sometimes compliance in mind, what are some of the challenges, and what can business owners do?
It's really challenging. We empathize a lot with the challenge that particularly smaller businesses have, because in Australia, for example, the kinds of things we do are we deliver training and workshops to organisations, and we do advisory. And we're creating a tool as well for risk management, but that's not really ready yet. So it means that most of the conversations we're having are with organizations who are concerned about the AI tools they're using, but they don't really know enough about the AI tools themselves and technologies to know whether it's something they need to be worried about. They know there's a lot of AI guidelines and regulations, but they're not really sure which ones they need to pay attention to and how to, if they see a guideline that says your AI must be ethical, how on earth do you do that? What actual steps do you need to put in place? And we see a lot of challenges in the baseline AI literacy, especially when a lot of the time these organizations are using other people's AI. We're using third-party or enterprise AI products. Every day I have a conversation with someone where I'm talking to them about AI security, and they say, oh, we use Microsoft Azure. Microsoft is responsible for any security issue or any issue regarding that AI, and that is absolutely not true. It depends what kind of incident it is, but the company that's using that third-party AI still has a lot of responsibility. A way that we talk about it in security language is that the artificial intelligence component or technology adds to that organization's attack surface in ways that cybersecurity mitigations and controls don't already cover. And so there's a lot of research into the ways that we can technically defend these systems and mitigate the risks of something bad happening, but it's definitely something that is still so new that it's really hard for organizations to go to a specific place of best practice to have really clear advice. So that's some of the work that we're trying to do as well in building the community.
You presented at DEFCON, which that's a big conference, right? But
It's the scariest presentation I've done, that's for sure.
Thousands of people from all parts of government and military. There was one particular stat that you threw up, and you asked the audience to think, what does this 95% mean or translate to? Can you help us and tell us a little bit more about that 95%, please?
So when I was at DEFCON, I was presenting a new technique that I developed, which is not the most difficult technique, is the thing. Like we're really at the ground floor when it comes to adversarial machine learning, and it's really easy to disrupt most models. And there are so many reasons for that, but most models that are productionized at the moment are based off existing foundational base models, and that was that 95% figure. So there are so many, we know there are hundreds of AI companies. Most of the time, they're not using their own models, or at least they are, in the sense that they're using a pre-built model and then fine-tuning it for their own applications. And so most of the base models suffer from similar kinds of vulnerabilities or weaknesses, and because of the convergence of machine learning models, it means that even if you were to develop your own model, it would still suffer from the same inherent architectural vulnerabilities that all deep learning models have. So, for example, reliance on the training data, such that if you poison that data in some way, then it will alter the classification or prediction confidence of the models. But in terms of the security of that, there's not a lot of best practice around how to monitor those training data sets to detect if they've been poisoned or not. Or, for example, if you were to, like the example earlier, add specific pixels to evade a particular image classification, there aren't necessarily cybersecurity practices that exist to fully protect models from that kind of threat, because they're probabilistic. In an information technology system, which is deterministic, it's pretty easy to put rules or guidelines in place or patch problems. But machine learning models, they don't say, yes, this is Harriet, let her into that room, if it's like an authentication system or something. It says, with 92% confidence, this is Harriet. And the owner of that AI system has set a confidence of 90% that is considered yes. So there is always going to be some level of uncertainty, and applying cybersecurity measures to those kinds of situations is really challenging. And the field is moving so quickly, though, that even since the DEFCON talk last year, the entire body of literature around how best to mitigate AI security weaknesses and vulnerabilities is changing so fast for the better. Like I've been presenting at security conferences for the last 5 years or so, and I used to be the only AI person there, and it was this sort of novelty. And now at DEFCON, there's an entire AI village that's dedicated to AI security challenges, and I'm here at an AI security conference in Manchester this week.
At a secret location that you're not allowed to mention.
Maybe you shouldn't put that on the podcast.
No, we will. We'll keep it.
Yeah.
We'll keep it, definitely. But it's a secret. You haven't divulged anything.
No, I haven't divulged anything.
And I'm safe because I know.
Yeah.
But so that's incredible. So by poisoning, and what we mean by poisoning is by ethical hacking, you're going in, changing a data set and making that model feel, or I say feel, but think that it actually confuse it somewhat to think, actually, I might not be too sure here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sort of anthropomorphization of the way that we talk about decision-making in models as well is also really interesting, because in a way you can, convince them of something. But the way that a lot of people think about AI systems at the moment as this sort of ephemeral, all-knowing black box means that there isn't that much attention to the security, because it's just seen as this human, and you don't really think about the security of a human or our ability to think and make decisions. But a machine learning model is an architecture just like any information technology system. It has bugs, it's made up of code, there's, errors, vulnerabilities that turn into exploits if someone is able to leverage them. for malicious purposes. And there are so many different ways that you can build machine learning models, whether it's for recognizing faces and image classification, or if it's a language model, and then being able to implement prompt injection, for example. And so all those differences in the way that you build a model introduce different kinds of weaknesses, and that's something that data scientists and security professionals need to work together on to understand how that gap can be bridged, which is very important but very, very hard to do.
So greater collaboration within the workplace, different skill sets, different mindsets.
Yeah.
What for a small, medium enterprise business owner who is focused on growth, who doesn't have the in-house resources and the skills at hand, listen to this, they might be kind of very fearful of AI. However, there's reports now saying that in the UK, not many businesses are adopting AI as much as they could be, but they need to be, right? Because the world is moving in that direction.
Yep.
What can business owners do to help get them skilled to a point that they know how to integrate AI effectively in a cybersecurity context?
It's I know there are many challenges when it comes to AI adoption and its security, but I'm really optimistic about artificial intelligence. We, like my team and I, we go to a lot of risk conferences because we're trying to understand better and bridge that gap between risk professionals, which is a whole other field that security and AI people need to work with from the perspective of actually implementing risk management practices into businesses. And we were at a conference recently talking about this, and one of the risk professionals in the audience said, "Oh, but isn't AI an optional risk like smoking or drinking?" Which I thought was really interesting because I'd never thought about it before, and we really sat with that. And our take is that it's a risk if you don't adopt AI, because every other organization is. So I guess from a business continuity perspective, it's important to make sure that your technologies and tools are in line with best practice. But the potential for AI to make work so much better and our workforce so much happier if we do it well is really profound. The ability to take away all those boring, autonomous, mundane jobs we don't want to do, it just makes workplaces much happier, more productive. And so I think it's really important for businesses to adopt AI in the right way. And a lot of the time when we're working with organizations, because it is in a training and advisory capacity, I genuinely think that training is so important, because not to call out Deloitte specifically, but obviously coming from a consulting background where you're always working with different vendors and products that say that they use AI, but without really saying how or why or what it does. I'd see so many businesses adopt these AI tools without really knowing anything about the technology. And it's the same today, even though AI has moved along a lot. It's really important that executives understand artificial intelligence enough to be able to understand how AI affects the way they lead businesses and how to interact with vendors and suppliers in terms of the questions to ask. For example, like the Microsoft example, where companies assume that Microsoft handles all their security problems. A lot of the times that's an assumption, because that question hasn't been explicitly asked, and it hasn't been asked in the right way, and it hasn't been asked in terms of all of the potential cases where an incident might happen. So when we're working with leadership, for example, a lot of the time it's about understanding AI technologies, understanding what those risks are and the business implications. And then, because people in their businesses know that business context best, it's about taking best practice in risk management. So things like creating an AI policy, understanding different edge cases and incidents that could happen, having response plans for incidents, but then applying that in the specific business context to understand, these are the assets that I have. This is the most likely kind of risk. that I might be liable to. These are all the regulations and laws that I need to be compliant with. This is how I prioritize what to do and how I enable my people to know the right kinds of skills. And depending on the business, sometimes they don't need to do too much, right? Like a lot of the time, relying on third-party AI products, as long as you have a good AI policy and a good risk management plan and a good incident response plan, and then being able to train your people from the sense of implementing that AI well is enough and sufficient. But a lot of the time we also work with organizations who are building their own bespoke models. They're taking models from open source platforms like Hugging Face, and they need to understand that there can be malicious files in those open source models. And so that requires a very different kind of plan to how they address that. And it requires more technical expertise in the workforce. And it requires like clear lines of accountability and ownership. We often talk to organizations who, we'll go to the leader and we'll say, who is responsible for AI risk or AI security in your organization? They're like, it's the AI team. We go to the AI team, or the AI person. A lot of the time they say, oh no, it's the IT team or the cybersecurity team. And then we go to that team and they say, oh no, it's definitely the AI team. So it's not clear who is actually doing what. So for all of the, the technical responsibilities, the accountability overall, a lot of the times it's a CISO, but sometimes organizations will, have other roles as well. So it's not about a one size fits all solution. It's more about, really understanding your unique business context and putting the best practice in place in the way that fits you and is, in line with your budget and what you can reasonably do, which is, it's obviously hard. It's already hard in cybersecurity, but it's harder in AI because there aren't as many resources that companies can use or as many products out there that will help. But, if there's anything we've learned from the rise of the internet and cybersecurity, AI security is coming. We have to do things now that will protect that from becoming a much bigger risk and superseding the cybersecurity risk, because there's no doubt that threat actors, criminals, they're actively working right now on all the different ways that they can exploit our AI systems. And if we don't do something about it, it's not just a risk for our businesses and our economic security, but our national security and our livelihoods and the way that our societies work. So it's an important responsibility for everyone.
Absolutely, irrespective of the size of organization. So is it also important for business leaders to ask the question in terms of, or knowing who wrote the code in that AI as well?
Yeah. I obviously talk a lot about security, but when it comes to overall AI risk, thinking about safety and ethics is so important from the perspective of, has this AI been developed in an ethical way, and the actions that it will take, is that in line with our expectations as the human designers? There's a really interesting, within the field, gap between AI safety and AI security, where, for example, the kinds of things I focus on are external threats to AI systems from adversaries, human or AI. And then the AI safety and alignment fields very much focus on how AI can adversely impact the environment. And there's that gap in research because the kinds of ways that we need to protect those systems is quite different. From an AI alignment perspective, a lot of the time it's building into the models guardrails and fail-safes, which is quite hard to do in a probabilistic system. And that's something that organizations also have less control over because they're usually using pre-built models. And so those guardrails are more external around the model than internal. So for organizations, especially smaller ones that don't have, massive in-house model building capabilities, understanding, holistically the security environment for their AI, but also depending on the use cases that we have, are we using AI systems to do surveillance, or are we using it in environments where it has access to healthcare data or financial data or PII data? How do we make sure that the ethical implications of the AI doing something wrong or making a bad decision, how do we minimize that risk as well? And there are things that can be done, but a lot of the time it's just asking those questions. We see that a lot of the time those questions aren't being asked.
And that's something that you obviously can help business leaders who aren't, familiar with the space to understand that. Right now, I mean, you're experiencing seeing this whole rapid, increase in adversarial machine learning attacks. You're hacking, but in an ethical way, just to make sure that you and the companies that you serve are prepared. Looking to the future, but I mean, not even forget 18 months. Next 6 months, 8 months, 12 months.
Yeah.
What are you seeing? Because you're at the forefront of this industry. What are you seeing right now that you can share with us without compromising your safety or security?
No, most of the research we do is open source, and we release it to the public. We recently did a research project where we were looking at unreported AI security incidents. There are a lot of incident repositories or databases where events get reported where AI is doing something wrong. But we were interested in understanding if there were also events reported that weren't being classified as security incidents where it was actually, a security incident, someone acting against the AI. And basically in this project, we found that there were many incidents that were happening but weren't reported because the AI community isn't really familiar with security reporting, and the security community isn't really familiar with how to look for AI problems. And it was really interesting going through the kinds of trends we were seeing, because when I started my PhD, like I said, it was this very theoretical academic field. It was all about potential ways that these models could be hacked. Now, we don't talk about adversarial machine learning, we talk about AI security. That's the practitioner-based field. And we are starting to see some of those theoretical techniques used in the wild, but in more creative ways. So the example I mentioned before of malicious files being hidden in model files. Basically, you can hide malicious code in the kinds of files that developers will import from open source model repositories, because they then want to fine-tune that model for their own task. But there can be, malicious payloads hidden in those files that will then do traditional cybersecurity exploits if they're downloaded into the computer systems. And things like open source malware databases, for example, where it's normal to have databases where anyone can report malware to the community, and then machine learning models are trained on those data sets. There have been many examples of malicious actors putting fake examples into that database that then affects the way that those classifications are made so that their malware isn't recognized by big malware classifiers like Kaspersky, for example. And a lot of the time, these incidents are only found by internal testing. So, when a company reports this incident, it's because they identified it and they are comfortable with the way that it's being public. They're like, oh, this wasn't on a real model. We tested this and we were able to find this and we remedied it. So, of course, there are lots of incidents that are going unreported too.
So Mileva, based in Australia, a global region, global player, and you're speaking at conferences and sharing your insights around the world. Are you seeing differences in approaches in different regions and borders?
Big differences, yes. We're based in Australia. We've always seen, the ambition has always been to be global, mostly because we started Mileva to try and not just help companies do AI security, but influence the conversation. It's really challenging when it's really just a few large companies in Silicon Valley that's creating all of the AI, and the way that, internationally, the ramifications of that means that, for example, in Australia, most of the organizations we work with, sometimes they create their own models, but they're largely reliant on third-party AI. And there isn't a very big AI security practice in Australia. The literacy is very much at the point where it's about how to adopt AI well. Whereas coming over to the UK, there's a really big AI security focus. You have the UK AI Security Institute, which was recently renamed from the AI Safety Institute. You have different, co-working spaces, different funding bodies, lots of conferences. It's really encouraging. And a lot of the research and the practice around AI regulation is coming from the UK and Europe. Mileva's about to set up a UK office, which is really exciting. So it means I can come over here a bit more. And we did always, the plan was always to head to the United States. My green card was accepted about a year ago, but I've been on a wait list, and Trump has made sure that I won't be getting there anytime soon. So eventually we'd like to head to the US as well, but it's really different because, yes, that's where a lot of the AI is being developed and where a lot of the really groundbreaking research is happening in those universities, but the regulation environment is also really different. There is not a lot of regulation. There's a big focus on deregulating AI, actually. There were some laws that were passed in California, for example, about the use of AI and how to do that ethically, but it's very patchy between all the different states of the US. So it means that wherever, a research lab or a company is based in the States, which is then creating everyone's AI, it really dramatically impacts the requirements for transparency of how they're developing that AI.
I mean, when you say deregulation, I hear alarm bells.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't necessarily think that inherently deregulation is bad. There's always a big case made for the balance between regulation and innovation. But in practice, I really see that the really important determinant around the development culture really is actually the culture. And regulation sets the guardrails on that culture. So I don't know if I have an opinion that I'm willing to voice and just say black or white that, regulation is good or bad, but it certainly creates challenges in an environment where the culture is already to push the ladder and to push the boundaries. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think there's some really interesting geopolitical ramifications of AI as well. Like the workforce impact, what happens when you have entire categories of professions wiped out without the kinds of considerations around how you could maybe keep those jobs but make them better. I think it's wild that we're just, erasing tons of jobs without instead making that question, how can we give everyone employment but make employment better for everyone? Instead of having some people work 40 hours a week and other people jobless, how can we create a society where everyone gets to work 20 hours a week?
And are you seeing that happening right now in terms of AI eradicating jobs?
Yeah, there've been, I can't quite remember which company it was. A couple of the big tech companies in the United States recently said that they won't be hiring junior software developers anymore. We can obviously see that a lot of professions like legal professions are being, the growth is much slower because it's so much easier for AI to do writing tasks. Things like, truck drivers, bus drivers, those vehicles can be autonomous now. So it's really challenging. But then also the centralization of power into these tech companies as well. I see sort of mirrors the encryption debate. I don't know if listeners may be familiar with the so-called crypto wars of the 1990s, but as different security services didn't have the ability to, even with a warrant, for example, get access to communications if there was some sort of security incident, like a terrorist incident, because of encryption, end-to-end encryption. That transference of power from the security agencies to private companies, I think, is also mirrored today with AI, where these private companies, have so much power over not just the data they have access to, but how they can then train models, and the way that the models may influence, perceptions around cultural values because of the way they produce outputs, not just culturally, but
and the natural discourse in
society. There's a misinformation, disinformation challenge there, but also, if I go into ChatGPT and I'm looking for a great cafe around here, I can expand that out, and the marketing potential in these models, and the proliferation of capitalist values, and it's very interesting. But yeah, that's what makes the regulation question even harder, I think, because it introduces a lot of existential questions that are already pretty contested and don't really have clear solutions at all.
So there's the ethics side of things, but also, in order for organizations to be able to grapple and deal with this, are you seeing a coming together of different skills? So, the intersection of AI and cybersecurity and the growth in that sector.
Absolutely. I remember the sort of transition around the year 2021, 2022, when the term AI security actually became at least a lot more prolific. And I mentioned, going to conferences and being the only AI person, whereas now at big security conferences, you have a lot of people working on AI challenges. And sometimes there's a bit of confusion around, is it AI for cybersecurity, like AI doing cybersecurity jobs, or is it more about the security of AI? There's an important intersection and grey area in there. But I've definitely seen the AI and cybersecurity communities come together a lot more. But to a person who's not that technical or, doesn't know much about either of them, they might kind of sound the same. Like they're both all about coding and computers and stuff. But practically, they're actually very, very different fields. And so it's really difficult in a professional sense to expect a cybersecurity professional to know a lot about AI. And it's really difficult to expect an AI person to know a lot about cybersecurity. So yes, there is definitely a bridging of those disciplines, but it's quite hard. Like it's a much harder challenge than I think people realize. And we're still at the point where we're creating venues to do that. My team has a podcast, for example, the AI security podcast, because no one was taking that space. It used to be called something else, and then we realized no one else was talking about AI security. So we just sort of named it that. And it's been really interesting talking to people about that intersection, because a lot of the time when I would go to those security conferences, it's the first time that cybersecurity professionals had even considered that AI could have security vulnerabilities. And they're security professionals. So it's definitely moving in the right direction. There are a lot of companies now, like specifically AI security companies. I guess we kind of are, but most of our work is in like training and advising rather than, the kinds of products that other AI security companies in the United States are developing, which is more like penetration testing solutions for machine learning models. And really applying that cyber doctrine to AI in a tooling capacity. So there's definitely a lot happening there, but there's maybe like less than a dozen companies, AI security companies in the world, and we're at the point now where they're sort of taking bets on where the AI security future is heading, and depending on the projected future that they see, which may be more or less relevant, it makes it really challenging for those companies to provide the right services in an industry that is changing so quickly. And so there's definitely a few companies that are like really struggling with that.
So that kind of is an interesting space for Mileva to exist, right? And business owners need to have that knowledge and understanding. So you mentioned that you're going to open the UK office. What's next for Mileva? What's going to be happening in the next few months?
Yeah, I'm excited. Like from a personal capacity, like we're an entirely bootstrapped company. We don't have venture capital. I'm the solo founder. So we have a team of 7, and we have advisors in the UK and the USA. But we never created, well, I never created the company with the intention to grow really fast and raise VC and then exit in 3 to 5 years, which is usually the plan for startups. We also do the research, like I mentioned. We do a lot of community building efforts. We have the podcast, we have different digests. It's really hard actually in an industry that's so new, where a lot of organizations still don't think they need to worry about AI security to scale really quickly or to grow or to see the impact that I would like to see. And especially coming from the Signals Directorate, where I was obviously seeing how AI security was taken seriously in a national security context, a lot of which was top secret. And so then deciding to create a company where I was basically going to people and saying, you should care about AI security. I can't tell you why, but trust me, you should, is not like the most promising start to a business. But fortunately, over the last 2 years, it's really changed and there's a lot more open source information about AI security. So yeah, we're going to set up a UK office this year because there's a lot more resources and best practice here in AI security, and this is where a lot of the thought leadership is, and we want to be in the middle of that. And in the USA, hopefully in the future, maybe next year as well, we want to stay on the pulse of AI security, which is tough, but I'm really proud of the training we deliver. For example, you mentioned my stand-up comedy routine. My approach to everything is basically, why do something boring when you could make it fun? So we deliver training that's really fun. Like, it's styled like an intelligence style brief, and it's really visually engaging for practitioners. There's cool demos. It's definitely not boring. And we have a tool in development, but we're still trying to figure out exactly what that value add is, especially in different markets. Like in the Australian market, the value add is very much, what is AI? What do I put in my AI policy? Whereas over in the UK and Europe, the value add is, how do I stay compliant with the EU AI Act? And then in the United States, it's very much, how do I beat my competitors at AI? So it's a really fun landscape. And if any of your listeners are interested in getting into AI security, now is the right time, because we're very much at the ground floor. Like any contribution to the field, especially if you come from different disciplines, is a really good thing. And AI security, no doubt, is set to explode. So it's a great time to feel like you're actually creating the field with everything you do. It's very exciting.
Well, on that positive note, I want to thank you for coming in. It's been a very thought-provoking and insightful conversation. Thank you for taking the time, even with jet lag. And we look forward to seeing more about what you do and getting you in again later on. But we will share some of the resources that you've mentioned for our audience. But Harriet Farlow from Mileva, thank you so much for your time, your insights, and a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.